Welcome back, everybody, to Aaron's Opinion. We are very honored and glad to be joined this evening at very short notice, by the way. Thank you for joining me. Aaron Spelker. Aaron Spelker, as I understand it, you are a YouTuber like me.
Mhm.
You seem to be very, very interested in accessible gaming.
Correct. Yes.
Um, and that really seems to be your niche.
Exactly.
By the way, I've interviewed illegally cited before on
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. He's great. Jesse Anderson.
Yeah, he's quite the character. Anyway, I thought you'd get a kick out of that. But before we really dig into the philosophy of accessible gaming, I need to know who you are. So who is Aaron Spelker? That's how I start all of my interviews. You can walk through your life story and just tell your story about living, and then we'll just get into as the story progresses. You'll walk into the gaming, and I'll help you by asking questions along the way. Go right ahead.
Sure. So again, yeah, my name's Aaron Spelker, and I have started a group called Mobile Accessible Gaming, which has a presence on Facebook, Twitter, as well as YouTube. And I got interested in accessible gaming. I was always a lover of gaming. Played video games from the 2600 up through the PlayStation 4, and loved playing games as kind of a distraction. And 3 years ago, I had an accident where I lost my vision. So I had an accident, went blind, and kind of in the months following going blind, I wanted something to distract me from this traumatic event that just happened. So I was like, oh, I'll do some gaming, and I was kind of struggling finding accessible content and accessible games to play. And I kept kind of searching the internet looking for that master list of what games a blind person could play. And I wasn't really finding a good list. So I decided to start the list myself. So about 18 months ago, I started the Mobile Accessible Games Group, which is again focused on all sorts of accessible games across a wide variety of genres that are playable using your phone.
Okay. Now I was born blind, and I'm 31, by the way.
Okay.
So I don't know how old you are. Not that it makes any difference, but I'm 31 and I've been blind my whole life so far. So it might be difficult for you to talk about it, but people can go blind in all sorts of bizarre
Sure.
circumstances, really. So you don't
Mine
have
is
to,
bizarre.
but can you tell me, only if you want to, can you recount the accident and describe exactly how you
Sure.
lost your vision?
Yeah, sure. As you say, bizarre is the key word. 3 years ago, in February, I was on my 20-year wedding anniversary with my wife in Cancun, Mexico. And on the first day, we went down to the beach and check out the ocean, that sort of thing. And a big gust of wind blew sand up into my face, and all the sand got into my eyes, and the sand caused abrasions on my corneas
Oh,
that introduced a massive infection into my
ugh.
eyes. There was a bacteria in the sand, and I ended up in the hospital for 3.5 weeks as they tried to fight off the infection. And after 3.5 weeks, they managed to get rid of the infection, so they didn't have to remove my eyeballs. But the infection and the treatment had just ravaged, pretty much all of the gears, the cornea and the retina and just everything in my eye. So my vision went from fully sighted to a little bit of light perception is what I have now.
My oh my. It's kind of I hope you understand when I say this in good taste. That's kind of fascinating to me. That's kind of science fiction for us blind people who've been blind since birth. All these weird ways that sighted people can go blind. That is well, how was the rest of the trip in Mexico? How
Well,
was the
yeah,
food? How was everything else?
yeah, it was actually a great trip. Because when I was in Mexico, my eyes were just irritated. Like I didn't know I had, an infection raging in my eyes. My eyes were tearing, and I just figured, well, I got sand in my eyes. It's going to bother me for a little while. And we actually just went back to Cancun this past year. We brought our kids, and we went to a different resort, but at a resort in Cancun. So, I don't hold a grudge against Cancun.
Cool, cool. All right, all right. Yeah, I mean, I've been podcasting and YouTubing. I've been doing this channel for about 3 years, you know. I mean, I've had all sorts of stories. As someone, I had a guy on the channel who got hit over the head with a brick, and then someone else was playing with thumbtacks and flicked a thumbtack in the wrong direction. The sticky, you know, the needle, the tack,
Yeah.
and it landed in their eye. I mean,
Uh,
there's weird ways of going blind. Yeah, that's really bizarre.
it's a
That is,
weird, the tough part I find is,
yeah,
if you're kind of born blind, I think the whole system, the system of support is geared around blind from birth. And there's
right.
schools and there's programs and there's job, placement stuff, and it's all geared around that situation. It's not geared around for a guy in his 40s who, was living a fully sighted life to suddenly be blind and have all the resources and know where to go and what to do. Like I've done a lot of scrambling and figuring out how to patch together services for myself. And once I figured out what they were great, but it was just finding them in the first place, which was the tough part.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And then so back to the gaming. I mean, were you someone who do you so what is your working background? What is your how would you describe your background that you're coming to me?
Yeah, I mean, I owned a financial services company. We helped companies set up their retirement plans, their pension plans, and 401(k) plans and 403(b) plans. And I was a half owner of that company. When I went blind, I felt like I was not really in a great position to service my customers because I was, I didn't know if I would ever get back up on my feet, in the months following. So I sold my company to my partner and, kind of decided to concentrate on, figuring out how to live life in a new way. Um, and I spent the first year of being blind. I actually wrote a book that I had always considered writing. Figured I had a lot of time on my hands, so I wrote that book and published that book. And then when I was done the book, I was like, well, what am I going to do now? I need something to distract myself. And that's right around the time that I started the mobile accessible gaming group.
So, what book did you write? What can you tell me about that?
I wrote a book. It's called The Bubonic Reorder. And so I came up with the idea in 2014 for this book. And I went blind in February of 2019. And I spent the rest of 2019 writing this book. So I finished the book in December 2019. All right. So that's an important timeline to know because the book is about a SARS pandemic that strikes the globe in the year 2020.
You know, I'm gonna have a follow up question for that.
Yeah.
Are you sure you weren't working for any other companies before you were working for a financial services company?
Like what? Like infectious disease companies?
I don't know, like
Chinese
CDC.
biolabs? Yeah, Chinese biolabs.
I don't know. Are you sure you weren't living in like some Asian countries?
Right. Well, it's interesting. In 2014, I kind of had the premise for this idea. It takes part in two parts. There's a part that happens in 1347 at the outbreak of the bubonic plague,
Right.
and it follows this family who's trying to survive and outpace the bubonic plague and all the death that's coming around them.
Hmm.
And then the other part of the book happens in the year 2020, and it's about a global SARS pandemic that's suddenly pops up and is spreading out of control. And it's about the doctors trying to figure out a cure to that. And then there's some through lines dating, bringing them back to 1347. And when I came up with that kind of general concept in 2014, I started doing a lot of research and reading up about pandemics and how they spread and all that. And when COVID-19 happened, it wasn't a surprise to me because all these journals and white papers and scientific things were really about when this happens, not if this happens. Like a pandemic will happen, and when it happens, it's going to happen like this, and it's going to spread real fast because you could be across the globe, in 12 hours, and it's going to spread simultaneously around the world at multiple hotspots, and there's really going to be no way to contain it effectively in the way that we typically approach things, which is kind of isolate and quarantine, and that's just not going to work. And how a modern pandemic is going to spread. So the way the scientists wrote all these white papers and articles, for the 5 years that I was doing research, is almost exactly how COVID-19 played out. They kind of knew it was going to happen, just people really weren't paying attention to it.
Hmm. Hmm. It's really fascinating. And then what made you want to start doing all this research back in 2014?
So I read an article that it was about European people who about 10% of the European population is immune to HIV. No matter how many times you expose them to HIV, they don't get it. And the scientists figured out that it comes from a mutation from people who survived the bubonic plague. And that reading that article is what kind of started me thinking about this concept of a kind of a past pandemic having a impact on a current pandemic.
Hmm. Hmm. It's certainly interesting. See, I didn't know that about you. That's really
Yeah.
good. And is your book on Audible, or where could someone find this book?
Yeah, it's Amazon and Barnes and Noble. You can get ebook as well as hard copy. I donated it to Bookshare for those who have print disabilities, so blind and visually impaired people. So if you have a Bookshare account, you can get it for free off of Bookshare. And my hope is that when they get through the backlog on Bard, that I'll be able to get it on Bard. I'm kind of talking to them about getting an audio version of it, but that's probably still a couple years away.
All right, all right. And when you weren't doing all of this research in 2014, were you always someone who was into video games and computer games?
Yeah, it was, again, it was kind of my distraction of, come day, as the wife sitting and reading a book, I'm just kind of sitting and playing a video game after the kids have gone to bed just to relax. So it was kind of the distraction, what makes you forget about the bills and the tough day at work and the, you know, things that went wrong during the day. It was a nice little distraction, big role playing RPG games, like Fallout and Skyrim and those type of big open world games that you can just play forever and ever. I didn't play. I'd play one game for a year as opposed to like a bunch of games over the course of a year. I would just sink myself into one uh, pretty heavily. So again, when I was kind of coming out from being blind and a couple months under my feet, it's like, oh well, I want to play a game, but what can I play? And I ended up eventually grabbing towards like understand that the iPhone has voiceover, and some of those games are accessible. Let me find out all the games that are accessible on the iPhone. And like I said, I was just having trouble finding a good list of that, as well as a description about the game and is it a good game. So I decided to kind of start a group on my own to share that with people who might be going blind behind me, who might want the same sort of distraction that I wanted when I first went blind, to just make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, yeah. You seem to, and I don't disagree with you. You seem to say that video games and these games are a great distraction for you. And I think that's why people play video games is that they need to distract themselves from, the everyday hustle and bustle.
There's
So I
also,
think, yeah,
yeah, and there's also, you know, games are designed to, like on a chemical level, give you joy. They have where you win and you feel elated by that, or they give you achievements or badges, that they're kind of designed to give you wins and accomplishments. And, again, kind of coming out of being blind in particular, where I wasn't sure I was going to accomplish anything. This was just a small bite-sized thing that I could tackle and feel good about. And then a well-designed game also allows you to play. You can play Dice World against somebody else who's a sighted person and compete on an even level with them, and maybe beat them, and feel that look, I'm still a person who can accomplish things and do things and compete. I'm not less than. And I think that's some of the things that gaming can show you as well. A good accessible game.
that's really interesting. So what are some of your favorite games to play? You've kind of hinted around some of them, but what are some of your favorite games, and can you really walk through the script of some of your favorite games to play and why they are your go-to games from an accessibility standpoint?
Yeah, so one of the other things I have done over the course of last year is I write articles for pocketgamer.com around mobile gaming accessibility. And I actually just released an article for them about the 10 most influential mobile accessible games that came out over the last 10 years. And that's kind of the list that is kind of my go-to list if you're a person who wants to check out mobile accessible gaming. Here are 10 games. They're in 10 different genres. They've come out in the past 10 years, and it really covers a wide variety of genres. There's board games, card games, RPG games, real-time strategy games, first-person shooters. There's a whole variety of text adventure games. There's a whole variety of different types of games that are there, and each one brings something unique. And I would say the biggest thing that is just a through line between them all is they do accessibility very well, which makes you kind of forget that I'm having a different experience, or that this would be it's kind of on the same par as a sighted person. You kind of forget that you're blind because the accessibility is so smooth that you don't get hung up and be like, oh, if I only could see this, or this isn't working, or this isn't labeled. And it brings attention back to the fact that you have that sight disability. All of these games are very strong in their accessibility design, that you just play the game and that's it. You play the game and you have fun, and you don't worry about or even think about the fact that you have some sort of limitation in a general world, if you will. But as I said, I like big open world role playing type of games. On that list, there's a game called Swordy Quest, which is quite fun. I'm playing one right now called Lost Vault, which is again kind of fight monsters, get your gear, level up. I very much before I went blind, I enjoyed a sports management game called Out of the Park Baseball, which was a baseball simulation game. Unfortunately, that game is not accessible, but I found a soccer game called Football Chairman Pro on the phone, which is basically the same thing. You have your players, your statistics, you're building up your stadiums, what price you're going to set for your tickets, for your concessions. You have to manage the turf. You got to buy and sell contracts of your players, and you got to win
That
games
reminds me.
and
That
pick it
reminds
up.
me of that. I have a younger brother. My brother played a game like that. I think like he played Zoo Tycoon or something like
Hmm.
that.
Yep.
That's what that reminds me of, where you basically simulate a certain environment. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's a fun game, and you literally take your team from the beer leagues, all the way up to the Premier Championship leagues. It's a very, very fun game, and there's all sorts of events that happen, that you have to manage as well as the owner of the team. So that's a fun sports management game, and kind of scratch that itch that I couldn't get from Out of the Park Baseball anymore, because that's unfortunately not an accessible game.
So let's dig into it a little further with these, RPGs. You say, I am not. I mean, I am not a gamer, although I do have some experience in certain things. Although I do have some usable vision, I'm really not a gamer. So, what is an RPG? Can you really, define that and explain those
Yeah.
ingredients?
So it's RPG stands for role playing game. Basically, you are the protagonist, so you're basically playing a version of yourself. Usually, there's a big world with a lot of different quests that you try to that you receive, and then you try to accomplish along the way. As you gain experience, you become stronger. You can attack better. You can you know what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, if you have to craft things, you're better at crafting things. So the more experience you get, the better you get at doing the different tasks, and you also get to choose as you develop. Well, what am I going to be good at? Like in this game that I'm playing right now, Lost Vault, I am playing a person who is a ranger, and as a ranger, I want to concentrate on certain statistics like agility and endurance because when you're a ranger, that's what you need. You're not going in and fighting with magic, so you don't need to have high intelligence, or you're not going in with a big broadsword, so you don't need brute strength. You need agility to fire from a distance. So you kind of can pick and choose how you develop your character over time, and that's kind of the main theme, I guess, of a role playing game. Storyline with a character that you get to determine how that character develops over time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's really really fascinating. So, are there any video games that revolve around some of your past interests, such as researching pandemics and different global crises? What if there was a video game, and I mean, the problem is now it's obviously in poor taste and not appropriate. But what if there was a video game where it was set in like the 1300s during the bubonic plague, and you could choose whether you would be a doctor, and then like a storyline would happen. Like, are there games like that? Do you suppose?
Well, there is one, again, unfortunately not accessible as far as I know, but I played it when I was cited, called Plague Inc. And
Mm-hmm.
you are trying to create a super virus, and you have to kind of balance how deadly it is versus how much it spreads. Because if you make it too deadly, it burns itself out. But if you make it not deadly enough, then it's just the common cold, and no one really dies from it. So your goal is to create a virus so that you're basically paying like a big pharmaceutical where you create the virus so that you could also create the cure and make a lot of money.
I think nowadays that would be in poor taste.
Yes.
Extraordinarily inappropriately poor taste now. Is that game even still like available? Because I think
Oh,
wouldn't they
I
want
don't
to probably
know.
take a game off the
Yeah,
market like that?
yeah, maybe. I mean, it was a pretty popular game back in the time. I mean, it's probably 10 years old at least, I would think, that game at this point. So it came out well before the pandemic. Um,
Yeah, but
but yeah,
even
I don't know if
it
it's
should
still
be
available or not.
at this point a game like that should be long since retired.
Well, I will tell you, I will
Yeah.
know this. In 2020, it was available because I did try to download it to see if it was a game that was accessible, and it wasn't. So at least in some point in 2020,
It
it
was
was
still
out
on
there.
the market. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is really 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 fascinating. So, what was your perception of video games as a sighted person, and then now how do you perceive a video game from our perspective as blind people?
Yeah, it's different. So there is, you might have heard of uh, the PlayStation game called Last of Us. Have you heard of that game?
Vaguely,
Okay,
vaguely.
so
Mm-hmm.
so Last of Us is kind of out there in the accessibility zeitgeist right now because they put out their game, and it has over 60 accessibility features, and is kind of touted as a AAA game, story driven game that you can play completely as a blind person without any assistance. Um, and I had played that game as a sighted person, and it's got such one. It's kind of in a trope that I like. It's kind of a sort of zombie based story, apocalyptic world. The world's collapsed under kind of a zombie type of virus, which is exactly the type of genre that I love. And so I had played that as a sighted person, and the graphics were amazing. The storyline was amazing, and after I went blind, they came out with the sequel to that game and with all these accessibility features. And I sat down to play it, and I could not disconnect from the visual experience that I had with the game. So while, let's just say if you sat down and played it and you have never seen it, never seen the game, and you played it, maybe you have a great time with it and it's loads of fun, and no, I can't believe I can play this game that everybody else is playing, and you would enjoy it. But for me, I really was disconnected from it, and it actually kind of started making me feel sad and depressed because that was one of my favorite games of all time, and now I was like, well, I'm not playing that game anymore. I don't know what game I'm playing, but it's not that game that I played as a sighted person. And it's kind of my primary primary game playing was console based, was the PlayStation, some computer games. I didn't really play mobile games very often. Um, but when I went blind, I kind of steered away from those PC and those console games just because they seemed more vision and graphic heavy. The iPhone, is there's not as much graphical power, so they don't rely on that as much, and so therefore there's a lot more games that I can play uh, with the voiceover accessibility and feel like I'm actually getting the experience I'm supposed to be getting it, not some dumbed down version or some you know vamped up version of the game. Like I was feeling like I was getting through the Last of Us Part Two experience when I played it. Because again, for me, I'm still trying to connect to it from a vision standpoint. I'm a lot of my, I don't know if this will change over my time because I've only been blind for 3 years, but I still perceive everything. My brain tries to create a visual representation of the world as I, walk into a room. I picture it. Um, I don't know if that'll always be like that or if that eventually goes away, but that's how I am right now. I'm very stuck in a visual mind frame, if you will.
Yeah, well, what you're stuck in is a no man's land, the land between what you remember seeing and how you see things now.
Yeah.
You see, because when I was a baby, my eyes were fixed. Still, I had a lot of surgeries, and still, I'm a blind person. Obviously, I cannot drive a car, or read a print book, or anything. But I still have had vision ever since I can remember. Some usable vision. So that's my only perception of vision. Is that you
Right.
know? So I think it's very different from when you start out as being sighted for so many years, and then something strange happens, and now you can't. Now you have to suddenly change your whole life, basically.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely a different way of interacting with the world. Um, and just there's things that get me that are, like I enjoyed, um, very much enjoyed, you know, putting a podcast on and going for, a 3 mile brisk walk,
yeah,
and I can't do that now because I need to really pay attention to what I'm hearing, to safely cross a street. So there's no like a walk. I don't go on a relaxing walk anymore. You know what I mean? Because I'm really just concentrating so much on hearing everything and making sure I'm being safe as I traverse wherever I'm headed to. And so it's a very different experience. You can when you're walking and you have full sight, I mean, you just really kind of tune out. You just go and you're not even thinking about where you're going. Your brain's kind of processing what you're doing, and you can listen to a podcast. You can let your mind wander to something completely different and not pay attention to where you're even going when you have vision to kind of process in the background where you're actually going. But as a blind person, I don't I feel like I can't do that. I have to be hyper
mm,
vigilant about paying attention to where's that car coming from? Where's that voice coming from? It does the sidewalk underneath me feel right that I'm actually on the sidewalk and haven't somehow veered into the street a little bit. It's a hyper vigilance that doesn't allow that relaxing stroll anymore.
absolutely. That's kind of an that's a really interesting notion that you're bringing to my mind. Um, well, I hope you realize that even though you're blind, you can still listen to Aaron's opinion.
Yes, exactly. My name's Aaron too, so I can listen to my own opinion.
That's true. That's true. You don't need me. You can
Yeah,
just have your opinion.
exactly. Listen to
Of
those all day long.
course. Of course. No, I just didn't want you to leave the pod. I just didn't want you to give other blind people the idea that if you're blind, you can't listen to a podcast because you can't walk.
Well, yeah, no, but yeah, I do it differently now. Now I get on the treadmill and I'll listen to it on the treadmill where I can
Oh, okay. So
find
now,
space.
so now you can listen to Aaron's opinion on a treadmill.
Right, or my elliptical machine. Yes, one
Okay,
of
all
those two.
right. Oh wait, this question has never occurred to me. Does my podcast sound better on a treadmill or over an elliptical?
Everything sounds better on the elliptical because
Of course it does.
when I'm on the treadmill, I'm usually running, and so then I'm breathing heavy and I'm making loud noises. So sometimes it's a little harder to hear when you're on the treadmill.
I would agree. Yeah, I have an elliptical too. I've always preferred the elliptical. I think it's a much better, much healthier, and much safer way of getting those muscles moving, and it's much better for the joints and everything. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are other blind people who still go for a walk and still go for a brisk walk, relaxing, and still listen to a podcast while walking briskly, not paying attention. I mean, again,
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. For me personally, I wouldn't feel safe doing it.
you'd
It's
be surprised. A lot of blind people still do it, and I'm sure that you can find someone who would give you some pointers about hiking or
yeah, I
walking.
find
Did you do a
I
lot of
find
hiking?
um not I mean, me and my wife would take walks in the woods, but I mean, not real hiking, if you will. Interesting though, I have like this really interesting draw. It's pulling at me, and I don't know why per se. But are you familiar with the El Camino?
Is it I guess not. Is it a trail? What is it? Tell me.
Yeah, the El Camino de Santiago is a pilgrimage. It's like an 800-kilometer pilgrimage through Spain to some, I think the Cathedral of St. James, I believe, is at the end of it. And it's like you walk it, and it's a pilgrimage, and you just kind of find yourself as you walk for 40 days through Spain and the countryside to get to this destination. Um, and I'm kind of just drawn. I keep finding myself, looking at that and joining Facebook groups about it, and I think that's going to be something that here in the next couple of years I'm going to walk some. I don't know if I'll do 800 because I think I'm going to need a sighted guide to be with me to kind of navigate that. So it's kind of hard to get somebody else who could take 40 days off, but maybe definitely some part of it you could do it in smaller chunks, like do the last 100 kilometers and do that in 8 days or so. So I might do something like that with someone.
That would be interesting. Yeah, yeah. What draws you to that?
I don't know. Originally, the only way I heard about it originally was there was a movie in 2011 called The Way, which is acted by Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez. Emilio Estevez is the director of it, and it's this kind of father-son story where the son, at the very beginning of the movie, the son is being dropped off at the airport by the father, who's Martin Sheen, and they get in this kind of fight, and the Emilio Estevez leaves on the plane to go walk the El Camino, and a couple days later, his dad gets a call, and this all happens in the first 5 minutes, so I'm not really spoiling anything. But in the 2 days later, his dad, Martin Sheen, gets a call, and his son has died on the El Camino. And I don't even know if they really explain how he died, but he dies on the El Camino, and the Martin Sheen flies over, and decides to finish the remaining 750-kilometer trek in honor of his son, and it's kind of a self reflection of Martin Sheen and his life and his relationship with his son and all the things that he, kind of overlooked about his son, and some of the great things about his son that he kind of passed over to focus on the things that he criticized about his son. So it's kind of this exploration. So uh, that movie kind of, is all about walking the El Camino, and the people that you find and the journey you go on. And I don't know, just kind of since I've gone blind, that movies kind of just, and that concept just keeps kind of popping up into me and drawing me to I think I want to go and do it. So you might you
Wonderful.
might be you might be seeing some daily video blogs as I walk the El Camino in 2023 or something.
Hmm. It seems to me, and I would say that I probably do know the reason for that. It seems to me that you probably feel, whether you're aware of it or not, or whether you're even willing to be vulnerable enough to me, even though we met each other a minute ago, basically. Probably you have some kind of frustration and sadness about being a sighted person who has a disability. And you probably feel that if you walk this trail, you will be completing your unfinished business. You'll be kind of filling in these holes of
Yeah,
absence.
yeah,
That's
no,
probably.
you're
I'm not a doctor. I'm just saying
no, you're definitely on the right track. I think
that's probably what the no. And I'm not saying. And by the way, I think it's a wonderful thing to do. Like I'm not telling you don't do it. I'm saying definitely do it.
yeah.
But I want you to know, as someone who's been blind their whole life, like when I heard your story and then you put it all together, I was like, yep, he's feeling a little guilty about being, a father figure who has to have a disability now when you were an able-bodied person. I mean, obviously there's certain things, Aaron, that I can't understand yet. I'm only 31. I have my challenges. I don't have a family yet of my own. Working towards those things, but you would know better than I. Definitely know better than I. These things don't. Nothing happens overnight. Everything in life is about the journey, and that's where I am, and that's where you are, and that's if you spoke to any other blind person, they would tell you, go hike that trail, but know why you're doing it and make sure that you come home a stronger person than when you left. And
Yeah, I
make
think
sure, yes, go
I,
ahead.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think as I think about it, I think it's there's kind of two levels of it. One is a little deeper and one's a little bit more surface. I think on the deeper level, it is there is a point of I think the walking that is also just processing this loss. It's like it's like losing a family member. There's a grief
Sure.
that is there that
Sure.
I'm still probably processing and trying to get through. The second is I am a very type A, achievement, goal
Mm-hmm.
oriented type of person, as you might have heard of, the just me like I go blind. I'm going to write a book. Done the book. What am I going to do next? I'm going to to start this mobile accessible gaming group, and I'm going to get that off the ground. And what's next? What am I going to achieve next? And I think there is a need to um, be able to register some wins and some achievements, despite a disability as well, and prove to myself that I can not decide to just lock myself in my house and life's over. Life still exists, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go live it. I'm not going to hide from it. I'm just going to
Well, there you
experience it a
go.
different way.
Well, there you go. So the reason why you want to hike the trail is you should tell yourself, well, the real reason, the main reason is because life's meant to be lived.
Yeah,
That should be the real reason. And then the internal stuff should be the internal stuff that you should think about. At night when you're asleep, when no one else is around, you should think, well, how am I going to process through this loss? I've never asked this question, and I know that you won't be offended when I ask it, but so if you're a sighted person, can you, and I don't think anyone could, can you express and I'm kind of showing my hands here. Can you put into my hands so that a blind person can understand what exactly is the loss of being a sighted person who becomes blind? Like, can you help me to hold that loss so I can understand it as a blind person my whole life, if that makes any bit of sense at all?
yeah. I mean, um, there is uh, a sense of independence that you lose. It's some regards I try really to do most things on my own, but there are times where I have to, because the world is a sighted place, I have to ask my wife for help on something or ask my son, and that's something that you don't you don't have to do as a sighted person, or at least in that way. And just there's things like I even think on this walk, I'm like, all right, I'm going to walk the El Camino. Like, if I was sighted, I would just see a sign that says bathroom right there, and I would just walk up to the bathroom and I'd go. Instead, it's going to have to be a whole chore where I'm going to have to ask somebody and go, can you guide me there? And I'm going to have to paw my well self, around inside of a bathroom trying to find a stall. And there's some of those indignities, if you will, of
Yeah.
independence that
Yeah.
go away, or just things like I want to run out to CVS. Well, now that's you know hour long journey for something that should have been 5 minutes to jump in a car, drive down there, grab what I need, drive back. Now I got to arrange a ride and get dropped off and then wait for a ride to pick me up. And there's that kind of independence aspect that gets kind of pulled out from underneath you. Um, I'm a lucky person in a lot of ways in that I had built a very successful career, and my blindness has not impacted me from a financial standpoint. I just retired in my mid 40s and perfectly financially comfortable, but it devastates a lot of people in their, I've talked to a lot of people.
You know what. Look, let me just because I love to joke around with people about these types of things. You know what, man? I think if you're doing so well in life, you know what I think, and I have a hunch, and it's an opinion show, so I could be wrong,
Okay.
but I think that God was looking at you, and He said, "That Aaron Spelker, he's doing fine at 40. Let me make him blind and send him home so he can enjoy the rest of his life."
Yeah,
Is that possible?
I don't
I
know,
mean,
but
think about that intellectually
maybe,
for a minute.
well, I think maybe I wouldn't say that. I think it'd be like, maybe I got to knock him down a peg or something like that. But no, I mean, I am definitely a person. I know there's a whole spectrum of people who, would say, I'm perfectly fine being blind. I would never trade. That's who I am. I would never want to be sighted. There's some people that I am not that person. I would give
Right.
just about, I'd give up all my wealth. I would give up anything to be sighted again.
Okay. Yeah, I
It
mean,
is
and the
lost
other
for me.
thing that you have to understand over time now for the rest of your life is that us blind people like me, right? We've been blind our whole lives. So if we were to become sighted, it wouldn't really work. We would have to have therapy and counseling, and
Yep.
our lives would be just as disabled by being sighted as yours seemed to be by you losing your vision when you did.
The one thing there's a friend of mine here who lives close to me, and him and his wife, both blind, and he has been a person that has really just shown me he lives just a very full and rich life, and they're never afraid to, they're like, let's go to a concert, and they go to the concert, or let's go down, to the city that's close to us and go to the food truck festival, and they'll just go and do that. And, nothing seems to stop them. Even though they're blind. And I've taken a lot and learned a lot from just watching them live life and understanding that you don't need to wallow in woe as me. There's a life to be lived, and go live it. Don't hide from it. And so I've taken a lot from him and his wife of showing me that side of things.
That's really cool. That's really really good. Yeah, yeah. Um, let's dig more into your YouTube journey.
Hmm.
So you haven't been on YouTube too long, but you're
Right.
doing a great job. You really have interviewed some really incredible people. Many of them I hope to have here on this show. Some of them I've already reached out to. But you're doing a wonderful job on your channel, Aaron. What can you, first of all, had you ever thought that you would be interviewing people? Had you ever delved or thought of that before? And then what pushed you over the edge to start a channel and really get into it with people?
Yeah, well, I like talking to people. I like hearing people's
Me
stories.
too.
I think it's interesting. Everybody has a really interesting story, and where they've come from and how they've gotten to where they are. So I like talking to people. The interview series, like I said, I started this mobile accessible games group, and every week I um, do a review of a game. So I play the game, I review it, I put out, for the community, here's a game I've played. And during that course of that, I often ended up reaching out to developers and asking them, questions about their game, so I could, you know, make a clarification in the review that I was writing. And I ended up just starting having conversations with them over email or over Zoom, and they were really interesting conversations. And I thought, this is kind of a shame. I'm the only one having this conversation with this developer. There's a community, that's 1,600 people of blind gamers who might be interested in hearing what these developers have to say about creating a game, or, hear what this other person who's doing accessibility walkthroughs, what their process is. And so I originally started by doing written interviews. So, here I send out 10 questions, write your responses, and then I would post that out to the Facebook group. And those kind of interviews just kept getting kind of better and better and more interesting, that I just kind of just switch over to YouTube where I could kind of do a live type of interview like this, where you could, not just have one question, but depending on what their answer is, follow that up with another question to get to interesting tangents that, may have otherwise not been mined through the written form. So I kind of made the switch that all future interviews starting in March of this year, I have been doing weekly interviews with, again, game developers who created an accessible game, or an accessibility advocate who's working to get, more accessibility in gaming for the community, or someone who is creating accessibility content, like doing walkthroughs of games and showing you how to play this game using the accessibility feature. So that's like Jesse Anderson from Illegally Cited. I interviewed him. That's the type of
Yeah, he's
YouTube page he
wonderful.
has. Yeah.
Yeah, he's quite the character. He gives a great interview, and he loves what he does, and he takes ownership of what he's doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's a character. He's a great conversation. Yeah, and extraordinarily knowledgeable about that one thing. I mean, he's got you covered.
Yeah.
Yeah. How
I think
many? Go
my
ahead.
long-term goal is, I'm kind of covering things and talking to other people about what they're doing. I mean, I
Hmm.
think my long-term goal is to get more into actually driving that change. If that's, working with a developer more directly as a consultant on, how they can add accessibility, or,
Hmm.
being on an advisory board of, an video description company. They're trying to add audio description into video games. To work and assist them on doing that. That would be interesting. So I think I'd eventually want to get into, as opposed to reporting on the change, more be one of the agent of change.
Yeah, but then if you're making all the changes, then I'm not sure if you could do both. That's the thing. I'm not sure if
Yeah,
you could be
yeah,
both the reporter and the change maker.
right. Yeah,
You know,
no, yeah.
um,
It would probably be a transition.
yeah. Well, that's so. What are some specific changes that you see that need to be made? Within the community of accessible gaming, what changes do you want to see in practice?
Yeah, I mean, at a real high level, I mean, there really should, accessibility only really works if you think about it from the outset of the creation and design of your game. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's, game gets put out and then it's, oh, how do we add accessibility to something that we've already created? And at that part, that's where it
It's too
becomes,
late. Yeah.
yeah, it's too late, or it's too expensive, or it's too cumbersome to do. If you had thought about it from the outset, it'd be a little bit smoother to incorporate. So, at a real high level, I want, my hope is through more awareness of other developers doing it, and from content creators and advocates, talking about it, that we get game developers to think about accessibility from the outset and creation of their games, so that way more and more games end up being accessible. Because right now, from an accessibility standpoint, only a mere fraction of games are really playable for the blind and visually impaired. There's many more games that are uh, not accessible, and unfortunately there's games that completely could be accessible but aren't, because of this sort of design thing. um, the second thing, and we're starting to see some movement on this, but a lot of the game engines that developers use to create their games, by themselves, don't have accessibility features. So they're using a tool set that doesn't really have accessibility as part of the features that they can incorporate in their game design. And we're actually starting to see some of those developer toolkits starting to add accessibility, plugins and add-ins, so that they can do accessibility right from the outset of the game. And then, feature-wise, I'm really excited. They've kind of started this where they're adding audio description, like you would see on a movie or a TV show,
Hmm.
into video games, and starting to. They just came out with Last of Us Part One. They remastered that game and they added audio description to all the cutscenes, which is great. Um, and hopefully a first step. I would like to see some audio description, actually not just the cutscenes, but in the actual gameplay as well, so that you can, maybe press a button and it would tell you, what kind of audio describe quickly what's around you. To your right is the door, and to in front of you is a desk with papers on it, just to give you a sense of where you are as opposed to just kind of um, blindly, no pun intended there, trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. That's really really interesting. So, have you gotten to interview some of the developers of some of your favorite games?
Yeah, quite a few of them. That's the content that my community members seem to like the most. They like the ones that are the developers of the actual games and kind of deep dive into a game. So every game I review, I try to reach out to the developer and try to get an interview. So I've gotten quite a few of the games that I've reviewed. I've managed to either in written form or in video form been able to interview the game developers. And again, what I find really interesting about a lot of the developers is you know they're adding accessibility is work for them, and it's not really a financial return for them. Often they might even lose money by adding some of the accessibility, but they just want their game to be played by people. They want people to enjoy their game, so they put the effort in towards the accessibility, and they're often, very receptive to hear about how they can make the accessibility better. And I just think that's really honorable from a lot of the people that I've talked to as game developers. They're doing it for uh, just making sure that gamers can play games, and I really appreciate that effort by them.
Yeah, well, that's really really fascinating. Um, have you like reached out besides Jesse Anderson and other great people like that? Have you reached out? Have you heard of other podcasts that kind of um, are in your niche because you really have a really really specific thing that you talk about? So, have you found other blind people in other countries, other parts of the world who also share this interest?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of content creators. I mean, again, a lot of them are doing reviews of games or walkthroughs of games. I specifically concentrate on interview. It's an interview show, talking to developers and accessibility influencers. So not anyone who's doing that specifically the interview series like I am. But you end up talking to other. I've been interviewed on other kind of blind podcasts and blind YouTube shows, where people just about everyone plays some sort of game, so everyone seems to be really interested to hear about this topic and learn about it, or they've done some interviews of their own of some of the people that I've also interviewed, but that's not what their show is primarily about. It's more about blind life in general, of which gaming is a sleeve of what they cover.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as we start to wind down the last few minutes of the hour, I always like to say how appreciative I am that you came and had such a nice conversation today. What are some questions that you would really like to ask me about Aaron Richmond, about Aaron's opinion about who I am as a person? I mean, I'm sure you're
But we're
kind
gonna
of curious.
yeah,
I'm sure you're curious,
we're
and you
gonna
should
flip
be.
we're gonna flip hosting duties now.
Please
Okay.
do, please
I
do.
will be the interviewer, you the interviewee.
Since you do that
Uh,
yourself, you're already good at that. Go right
yes,
ahead.
right. I can do it. So of the interviews that you do, like this one, what is the topic that really you appreciate the most? Like what gets you really excited to talk about in an interview?
What gets me really excited to talk about an interview is when someone comes like you and many others who has a really interesting story, who is willing to philosophize with me and willing to be vulnerable. Like when I was asking you about, the true reasons why you wanted to do that hike, you were vulnerable and you were open and you were receptive to, basically me holding your feet to the fire and me kind of giving you that push. So I think, in a good way and in some ways, the guests that I appreciate the most, apart from all of them, because it takes a lot of courage to be a guest on any podcast, but I especially like guests who are willing to be vulnerable, willing to be positive, and willing to be philosophical with me about really breaking down the meaning of their life and breaking down the meaning of behind what they do to make them successful. So for me, it's about really getting under your skin a little bit and then using that awkwardness to kind of say, well, look, this is life. So I guess the guests that I appreciate are the guests that really help us to understand our lives better.
And then, you're covering a wide variety of content. So
Right.
where are you finding all the people that you're interviewing?
Well, I guess most or many just come from the various blindness groups that we're both in on Facebook. A lot of them, there's this one particular person, you'll meet him, he's a Tunisian man, and he really loves to suggest guests to me. So sometimes he'll suggest a guest. Other times I consume, obviously, all of us do it. We spy on each other, we watch each other's content and watch each other's videos, and we figure it out that way based on who we want to interview. Sometimes I'll listen to a podcast and reach out to their host and just basically trial and error over a slow period of time, over a very, very slow period of time before I get some people that are willing to come and talk to me. But that's basically how, just trying to reach out to people that are within my audience and within my circles, basically.
Yeah, for me, it's a constant like sleuthing project to find somebody's contact
It's
information.
really hard. It's
Find,
really hard.
okay, here's a game developer. Let me get on their website. Let me find their contact. Oh, it's a contact form. Okay, let me fill that out, see if they get back to me, or somehow do a Google search and find their email address. There's probably about six right now, different people I'd like to interview that I either don't know their email address or I've sent something out and I haven't heard anything back, which makes me question whether I have the right contact information.
You
Um,
probably, you know what, you probably did, and they'll get back to you when you forgot about it. Like when you least expect it, that's when they'll get back to you.
yeah.
I had a guy a couple weeks ago. I interviewed him. Um, I interviewed him. I asked him, "Why do you want to be on my show?" I said I was talking to him over the phone. He happened to be a sighted guy. And I asked him, "Why do you want to be on my show?" And he says, "Well, 2 years ago, you sent me a message, and I thought I should get back to you."
Well, there you go. Cleaning out that inbox, right?
So yeah, that's exactly what it was. He was digging around in his inbox, and a message just surfaced. He's like, "You know what, though? That Aaron's opinion thing. I'm going to check that out." And come to find out, we had a wonderful conversation. So a lot of it, like I was saying before, when I was kind of philosophizing with you about, El Camino, I think it's called. A lot of these things I think are kind of meant to be for some, I don't know, some other purpose. Who knows? I think the interviews we have are interviews that we're supposed to have. Things line up in the right, the right way.
Yeah, I'm happy to be interviewed by anyone because my hope is to reach a blind person who might be, oh, there's no game for me and I have nothing to
Yeah.
play, or oh, all there is out there is Dice World, or or a text adventure game. Those are the only games, and I don't like those games. And I will tell you that I have like 20 different genres of types of games that are covered and reviewed on the 100 games that I've reviewed so far in the last 18 months for the Facebook group. So there is, whatever type of game you like, there is at least one of those available for you out of my Facebook group. So, I want people to know that there are games out there and they don't have to, just accept that there's, only, again, text adventure games, or just, a dice game and that's it. There are many different types of games available for you. And if you like games, I'm sure you'll find something on the list of 100 different games that, you might like to play.
Right. Right. Well, really good. Really, really good. And if you can ask me now, I think we've come to a beautiful conclusion to a beautiful episode, as always. If you can now ask me only one more question to really make me sweat, to see if I'm worth my salt as a podcaster, what do you really want to know?
Hamburgers or hot dogs?
For sure, definitely, almost always hamburgers.
Fully loaded, or are you pretty, pretty plain?
On my hamburgers, I put a lot of jalapenos, bacon, mayo. Uh, but what about you?
I am definitely a hamburger person. There is a My favorite hamburger is right here in my local town. It's called a patty melt, and it is a hamburger with like melted Swiss cheese on
Oh,
like like in a panini press.
uh huh.
It's really good.
Yeah, that would be really good with an ice cold beer at night, for
Right.
instance. That would be
Yeah,
really good.
and it has like caramelized onions on it.
Yeah,
So good.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that is really, really fascinating.
So I deem you good. You picked hamburgers. Good choice.
What would you have done to me if I had said hot dog?
That's fine. Like, well, do you like, plain hot dog with just like ketchup and mustard, or do you like Chicago style with like all the stuff? You sound like you might be on all the stuff kind of hot dog first.
And on that very humorous note, very, very endearing note, if someone wants to get in touch with Aaron Spelker, how would they go about getting in touch with Aaron Spelker?
So we have a Facebook group that's called Mobile Accessible Games, and that's where you will find weekly game reviews that get posted out on Sunday and weekly interviews that get posted out on Wednesday. If you want to kind of follow accessibility news, you can follow my Twitter handle. That's where I kind of follow a lot of people and retweet interesting accessible stuff. So you can just follow me and see all the great stuff that they're tweeting about. The YouTube channel, which has all of my different interviews, is really just under my name, Aaron Spelker. And I think we're got 20 plus accessibility interviews with a whole bunch of different content creators and advocates and influencers out on that site right now.
Awesome. 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 Well, thank you so much for joining me. You are forever a member of the Aaron's Opinion family here. You're forever welcome on this podcast.
Excellent.
I wish you continued
So
success.
can I co-host because my name is Aaron as well? It'd be like Aaron's opinions. You do that.
That would be pretty good. Who knows? Who knows? I hope that you will.
We could just keep gathering up Aarons, and then you'd have like five hosts all named Aaron.
All right, all right. Well. That's maybe you can do maybe you can do stand that would be just like the visual image of that, like five people on the screen and their name is Aaron. Like that's
You have
pretty.
to guess which Aaron's opinion has been put out.
I see. I see. I see. All right. All right. Well, I'm glad that they're listening to Aaron's opinion on this opinion, and I'm glad that they can also listen to Aaron Spelker. And you're forever.
In my
You're for.
opinions,
And what?
and my opinions on my stuff.
And absolutely, and you should. And so please continue to share your love for video games and all of Aaron's opinions on Aaron Spelker. So thanks so much, everybody. Take care. And we'll see you back here next week, same time, same place. Stay safe out there, everyone, and get back to your video games, everybody. Thanks so much. Help one person today. Help 1 million people tomorrow.